Hey friends, it's Mal. Welcome back to my YouTube if you're watching, and welcome back to my podcast if you're listening. Listen, y'all, I was taking a look at the week ahead of April 17th, 2023, and I think the astrology is significant enough to make a little week ahead forecast video for you. I just want to put out a little extra content this week just to help some people out and maybe give some people some guidance. Channel what I'm feeling this week is really about, and if it resonates, let it resonate. If it doesn't, let it fly. But let's walk through day by day, starting on Monday, April 16th, all the way till Friday, and just kind of talk a little bit about the astrological energy of this week, with that eclipse sandwiched right in between later in the evening on Wednesday, April 19th. Okay, and then at the end, I'll do some mini rising sign forecasts for the eclipse. Here's the thing. Okay, raise your hand if you've seen astrology content that, you know, echoes some kind of panic or negativity surrounding eclipse season. Yeah, right? Like, it tends to be one of those fear-mongering kind of transits where we're like, oh my God, it's an eclipse. What does it mean? Is it a bad omen? And I find it helpful when we're getting into like the quote-unquote scary transits or the quote-unquote scary cards in the tarot. I find it helpful to just peel that back and try to figure out where that comes from. And one thing that comes to mind is an eclipse inherently has to do with the sun and the moon, right? And specifically, it's a lunar event, right? Every eclipse is either a full moon or a new moon. And the reason it happens is because the moon is within a certain degree away from the nodes, okay? So what does that really mean in English? When we think of the moon, what does it really mean in mundane astrology? Sure, the moon rules over our emotions and our feelings, but fundamentally, the moon is a planet that really describes the material world and how it is ever changing. So, you know, the way that you wake up on the wrong side of the bed, but then by lunchtime, your coworker buys you a Starbucks and you're feeling better. And then you get a text from your crush. And then later that day, a phone call from your mom turns your mood sour again. You know, like this sort of small waves of emotions we experience during the day. It's a lunar thing because we're sort of riding with the changes of the world, right? Which is why, that's why all of like the the great spiritual yogi, Buddha, Bodhisattva masters would tell us, like, one of the least conscious things we can do as humans is to be sort of torn back and forth by our emotions, because when we are constantly being led by our emotional world, we're setting ourselves up for a day that's very up and down, right? Like, because we're being like twisted and turned by all of these changes that are being reflected back to us by the material world, right? And supposedly a much wiser way to live in consciousness is to try to remain grounded and centered in our own sense of whether it's inner peace or our own sense of just strength or groundedness, or just a sense of who we are at our core, adds up to a less choppy existence, right? And going back to the moon, right? The eclipse kind of represents this moment where the moon is going through a big change, right? And not to mention, when there's an eclipse happening, the nodes are directly involved with the moon, right? I mean, the nodes are always directly involved with the moon because they're they're sort of parts of the moon in a way, I guess is an easy way to explain it. But at the same time, this eclipse evokes what are the nodes. If we know the moon rules over material changes and the ever-changing, churning of the physical world, the nodes, I believe, are points in astrology that sort of rule over karma in some way. Now, what is karma? What do I mean by karma? For me, it's not this ominous thing like, oh, karma's a bitch, like, things are gonna come back to you that you put out to you. I mean, whether that's true or not, it doesn't necessarily factor into my definition of karma, which is simply cause and effect. If I take these cards and I shuffle them and I pull a card, I'm making a cause and effect. Like I'm causing the cards to move, and they're having an effect in the sense of a card is coming out, right? So there's something about the nodes that kind of add up to cause and effect, but in a greater scheme of our souls. So there could be kind of past life lessons, ancestral lessons that are triggered when the nodes are involved. I think about the nodes being really what our souls signed up to learn in this lifetime, right? So after that big explanation, we can kind of see why sometimes eclipses are branded as this like fear-mongering astrological transit. When we peel it back, eclipses, they have to do with the moon and the nodes. The nodes being about like our soul contracts and our past life lessons and our karma. As grandiose as all of those phrases are, right? They almost lose their meaning when you just list them off like that, right? But take that with a grain of salt. And then the eclipse having to do with the moon, which is the planet of change, right? And I have my window open, so we're gonna hear some outdoor noises, but we're just gonna flow with it, okay? So the moon being the planet of change, something that eclipse season will inevitably bring up is how well or how do we manage change? How do we manage the changes that are potentially weighing on our hearts? How do we know when something is ready to be released or quote unquote eclipsed from our life? And how do we know when it's time to really embrace something new? So these are all of the themes that can come up around eclipse season. Now, I find this eclipse that comes up this week, which is later in the evening, at least Central Time. It's Wednesday, April 19th, 11 p.m. Central, or Thursday, 4:20 midnight Eastern is the time of this Aries eclipse. And it happens at the 29th degree of Aries. That's interesting. For me, the 29th degree in astrology tends to be a really interesting degree because it's the final degree of the sign. And it represents some sort of final lesson that the sign has to learn. So this eclipse is really beckoning us to think about Aries in the greater scheme of what is Aries, the soul lesson of Aries. And also, where is Aries in our own chart? And how can the soul lesson of Aries be applied to this arena, right, of our own charts? So it's going to be an exciting week. And just to calm your nerves a little bit, before you go any further, know that I'm not going to fearmonger this eclipse. I'm not I'm not like a poppy TikTok astrologer where I'm telling you that, it was the luckiest day of the year or whatever, or the worst day of the year. It's not it's not my style. So do know that. I try to present a grounded astrological viewpoint. But also know, I forget the second thing. Okay, well, just know that I'm not gonna fearmonger the eclipse, and the other thing will come back to my ADD brain. But for now, what we're gonna do in this video / podcast is we're going to go through each day of this week, Monday through Friday, and just kind of check out what the moon is doing on each of those days. We know the eclipse is late at night, Wednesday evening, but what happens in between then, and how can that inform how we hold ourselves and hold our energy this week, okay? And then at the end, if I still have the energy, we'll go in a little bit further into the rising sign forecasts, and I'll just do some really brief topics that might be coming up for you during this eclipse season. Okay, so I'm actually really excited, and let's start with Monday, April 17th. Okay, so Monday, April 17th, the moon will be in Pisces most of the day, but around 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern time, the moon will finally move into Aries. And this is kind of like the beginning of the end, right? Because we know, late at night on Monday, the moon will finally scoot into 0 degrees Aries. And we know the eclipse later midweek will be at 29 degrees Aries. So it's almost like the moon is going to travel through every single degree of Aries to get to the eclipse point. That feels extremely significant to me because every single person who's listening, whether you have planets in Aries or not, you have an area of your chart that is Aries. You have this 29 degrees, 30 degrees of Aries somewhere in your chart. And, the moon is going to go over every single degree of that part of your chart and sort of, I think, kind of probe at some of those Aries lessons. Let's talk a little bit about the moon in Aries in general. What does the lunar transit through Aries typically bring? Well, we can think of Aries as the sign of Mars. And Mars being the sort of planet of war and sort of this more masculine, active energy, this energy that has to do with going your own way and potentially a more selfish energy with Mars. We get sort of like I have my own agenda and by God, I'm going to get my agenda done. Like I'm going to plow through everything in order to fulfill like the duty that I have to play. Okay. So that's something that Mars really likes to do, or something that Mars does best, right? Like if you gave, Mars I'm making shit up, guys, but if you gave Mars like a note and you said, hey, Mars, I need you to deliver this note, but you have to go through an entire battlefield to get to the other side of the battlefield to deliver this note. Granted, Mercury's more of a deliverer of messages, but just go with this. And Mars says, yeah, sure, I can do it. And he just like plows through the battlefield, like doesn't care that like people are in his way. He's like, fighting people and jumping over bodies. And I know that's kind of cryptic. I've been watching too much Game of Thrones, but you kind of get the with the image there. Like Mars has this intense will to get things done, right? Regardless of the external circumstances. Now let's think of the moon visiting Aries, which is Mars's sign. Well, when the moon is here, we kind of get this mix of maybe the material world kind of reflecting something back to us about choosing oneself and choosing one's own agenda. And potentially there being some sort of aggravation or irritation surrounding other people's agendas and other people's like material stuff that they're getting in order, sort of being in the way of our own agenda, right? So there's a little bit of like this independence versus interdependence thing that I think comes up with the moon in Aries later in the evening on Monday. We'll really start to feel this on Tuesday once the moon starts to square Mars. That's going to be important. Keep in mind that the moon is in Aries on Tuesday, April 18th, and Mars is in Cancer, okay? So the moon is in Mars's sign, as we've established this week, but Mars is in Cancer, which is the moon sign, okay? So in astrological terminology, we call this reception. So what's kind of happening when the moon and Mars are in reception? Because, you know, they're still squaring each other, and, you know, Mars isn't doing so hot in the moon sign. He doesn't like it because, remember, Mars just wants to plow through the battlefield. But in Cancer, you know, Cancer is like empathizing and picking up on the energy of everybody, and you know, Cancer's nurturing and sort of paying attention to the different people around them. And Mars can't quite do the agenda, you know, carry out the agenda that he wants to carry out in Cancer, right? Because it's like his heartstrings are being pulled when he just wants to go on his way, right? So there's something here, you know, the martyr archetype kind of comes up for me when I think of Mars in Cancer, specifically this Aries moon squaring Mars in Cancer on Tuesday, April 18th. There's something here, what do we think of when we think of the martyr archetype? This is an archetype that's very close to my heart as a Cancer rising. So if you have Cancer placements, you may find yourself kind of battling that inner martyr archetype throughout your life. But what does the martyr archetype say or do? What the martyr archetype does is they sacrifice themselves in order to save someone else, which I guess can have like a higher frequency if we're looking at like something like the story of Jesus or like a saint or something. But I'm thinking about that like one meme. Have you seen it? Where it's like, oh, Jesus died for us. That's manipulative. That's kind of like that martyr archetype. Like, you know, we can tap into when we are exhibiting the martyr archetype within ourselves, whether we have Cancer placements or not. You know, like we clean up the whole house and then our significant other gets home and we start telling them how tired we are and how hard we worked and blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, our significant other is like, I would have done it. Or like, I would have helped you. Like, you didn't have to do it all yourself. You're the one who chose to do it all yourself. And then you're like, wow, you're not even appreciative of me? Like, like that's what the martyr archetype does. It actually, I think, plays on sort of an inner child wound that wants deeply to be noticed and loved and appreciated, which I believe are universal human needs. And, you know, when we're playing out the martyr, it's really us kind of playing out our inner child in a way, like, see me, acknowledge me, love me, view me as valuable, tell me I'm valuable. And it doesn't always work out like that, right? Because that's the thing, when the martyr archetype is at play, we tend to maybe trip over ourselves because on the one hand, people might not be asking us to sacrifice ourselves for them in that way, right? So we might need to check ourselves a little bit on Tuesday before we make a huge personal sacrifice in order to, quote unquote, like save someone or people please someone. If we are people pleasing, early this week, or just kind of not in alignment with our autonomy, and we're maybe using other people in our lives as like distractions, especially if we're using other people's problems as like distractions from our own problems. I think this week, especially the beginning of the week, is going to call us out on that in some way. Like we might kind of get that sting of, oh, I should have not been focused on that, and I shouldn't have necessarily helped them unless they had asked for my help, or I shouldn't have necessarily given that unsolicited advice because they didn't necessarily ask. And I should have maybe refocused on my own stuff that I've been avoiding. Like there's a lot of stuff that can kind of come up when this moon in Aries is squaring Mars in Cancer on Tuesday. But overall, how to deal with it, and I'm gonna pull a card for Monday, Tuesday, but I'm thinking how to deal with it is it's almost like kind of refocusing on what is truly your path in this moment. Remember, Aries being the sign of autonomy, individuality. You wouldn't believe how I'm having trouble putting into words as I'm kind of imagining it, but just how many distractions there are from ourselves on this planet, right? And sometimes, we look at someone like someone with an alcohol or a drug problem, and we're really easily able to like see the negative in that person, being like, oh yeah, they're totally distracting themselves from their problems, right? Like we really demonize that. But in that judgment, we so easily pass that judgment because we're also distracting ourselves from ourselves, in other ways. And I certainly do it, right? I mean, in a sense of, I have a tendency to get maybe too over involved in other people's issues, or too emotionally invested in other people's relationship problems or things like that. And, I'm sure we all do this, but there's a little bit of a reckoning here where it's like, if you're irritated on Tuesday, if you're fed up, if you're feeling like you can't make progress because of sort of someone else, quote unquote, blocking your path, or some kind of obstacle, quote unquote, blocking your path, it's definitely a day to revisit, where is my autonomy in this moment, and how do I refocus on what I'm here to do in this lifetime, instead of turning my head at every little distraction. I'm thinking about this idea of having like I definitely have some iteration of ADHD, neurodivergence, but like to have like cosmic ADHD, like we kind of all have it. Like we're all kind of distracted from ourselves in some way, if that makes sense. Now, the cards that we pulled for Monday and Tuesday, we have the Fool, and then we also have the Six of Swords. Okay, sorry, I always forget if this is the Six of Wands or the Six of Swords, but it's the Six of Swords. So this, for me, is really confirming this sort of like, get back on your path. Like, get off of anybody else's road. Like, if you've been detouring down other people's problems or other roads, it's time to hightail it back to your path, mind your own business, mind your own business, and just kind of revisit why you may be distracting yourself or why you may be avoiding your path in this moment, because this is a really good moment of tension as the moon squares Mars to just kind of tap back into who you are, which is very Fool, Six of Swords. All right. Now, Wednesday, all day Wednesday, we're kind of leading up to the eclipse late at night, right? But there is, the moon will conjunct Chiron. That'll be around, let's see. I have, let me see, what time does the moon conjunct Chiron? I feel like I'm wrong about the time I wrote down. Let's see here. So the moon will conjunct Chiron around, okay, so it is around midnight on Wednesday. So super, super early in the morning on Wednesday, the moon will conjunct Chiron. So there's that kind of trigger of the wound, trigger of the core wound that we're carrying into the eclipse season. But then later that day, Wednesday around noon, the moon will conjunct Jupiter. Okay. So here's where I want to make this point. We can't necessarily make the argument that this eclipse season is going to be giving like unexpected surprises, because Jupiter's already been in Aries for like 4 or 5 months, right? So Jupiter has already been working its way through the Aries part of your chart, right? So, the fact that the moon is going to conjunct Jupiter and then be on its way to the new moon eclipse, this feels to me like there's some kind of final chapter now being written with Jupiter's time in Aries. We have less than a month before Jupiter moves into Taurus. Whatever expansionary measures Jupiter was working on in your Aries house is sort of at the finish line, but it might not necessarily feel like it's this big finished project wrapped in a bow. There's kind of like big quit energy that kind of is being brought up with that moon conjunct Jupiter. It's kind of like a burst of emotion that maybe has to do with, I can't do this anymore, or like, I just know this is not my path, or I just know that my body is telling me to leave this environment or leave this situation. It almost feels like I just can't do it anymore kind of moment around noon on Wednesday. And again, I don't say that in an ominous way, because that doesn't necessarily mean like you're walking out of your job or whatever, although I might be on Wednesday. But there's something here about like, it really comes back to our power. And have we been giving our power to make choices, make autonomous, independent choices, the things that are best for ourselves? Have we been giving that power away, right? And I think that moon conjunction with Jupiter kind of brings up a little bit of this sort of like, oh, wait, I'm angry at the situation, but also there's some kind of revelation here with where have I been giving my power away? It could even be like I've been giving my power away to, continuously letting myself worry about money every single minute of the day. Like, yeah, maybe my bank account isn't like, overflowing right now, but like there's really, like, I don't need to be letting my mind wander there every single day. And that is every single hour of the day. And that's a sort of reflection of how I've been giving my power away to something that's not in alignment, right? So it could be anything like that. It could even be a mindset. It doesn't necessarily have to be a literal external situation. But there's just some kind of revelation that I think we're having midday Wednesday. And I'm going to pull a card on this. Let's see what comes out here. All right. Yeah. Okay. So the Two of Cups. There's a couple cards. Two of Cups comes out, which for me is like what follows the anger or what follows the burst of emotion is a reconnection with what truly matters. And sometimes we lose ourselves in the worries and the struggles of the material world, and we sort of forget to reconnect with what truly matters. And we're connecting more with what feels like a struggle, or what feels like a fear, or what feels like an anxiety. But we can have that experience. This isn't me saying, love and light your anxiety and just don't feel it. I would never say that. Like, I was anxious, a lot of moments today. But it has to be paired with that reconnection to the dream, with that mantra that feels really true to your heart, with the meaning of your project or your name. It's that reconnection with the meaning that's happening. And the other two cards that come out are the Five of Pentacles and the Moon. So this feels to me, again, it's like the battle between the narrative that, really tells us like, you're not safe, or the worst is coming, or like it feels like that over-exaggerated fear narrative that sometimes can come up in the face of change. Have you ever gone through a big change, and that's also kind of hand in hand, one of the more scary moments of your life, and it's where those bigger fear stories are starting to come up. That's kind of what is reminded, or what comes up for me when I see this Moon Five of Pentacles thing on Monday. Like those fear stories are there, but also the possibility of reconnecting with the dream, with the meaning. The Two of Cups is there. And I'm going to talk about this more on Which Church this week as well, but which is my podcast. If you only listen on YouTube, you can kind of get some more content on my podcast. I don't usually post Which Church on YouTube, but we're going to be talking about intention setting, and that being a really grounding, positive force within kind of those rocky moments, right? So I think that Two of Cups is really reminding me of that. Like, keep your intention really close to your heart this week, okay? And then, of course, the aspect that comes next, late at night, early in the morning on Thursday, 4:20, we'll have the eclipse at 29 degrees Aries. And again, like this 29th degree, it's an ending in some way. We're finishing up our journey with Jupiter and Aries. We're finishing up something with this Aries story, which does tend, again, to have to do with knowing who we are, knowing what we're capable of, and maybe even having the gumption and the grit to keep pushing past our fears, or keep pushing past the narrative. And for me, Aries kind of reminds me of like the caveman, not in a way where I'm trying to downplay like the divine intelligence of Aries, but like I just think of like, wow, like it's kind of incredible how much us as like a human species have survived. And it's kind of amazing, like how what's the word, like how we've like our ability to survive is truly baffling. And I think about that, like, the sort of grit and gumption we have to have in this lifetime to survive, not just physically, but also like emotionally and spiritually. And I don't think our souls come to earth necessarily for like an easy time that is just filled with joy and happiness. Like I think there's something here when it comes to like, what were we really here to do? What was written in our soul contracts? Like, that all that kind of stuff is brought up with eclipse season. Okay. Now, what's interesting is, again, this eclipse is happening at the 29th degree of Aries. And let's see, what time is this at? It'll be, the next stop that both the moon and the sun have, after they leave the 29th degree of Aries, is 0 degrees Taurus, right? And it looks like the moon will get to 0 degrees Taurus around, it's around midnight on 4/20. So right after the eclipse, the moon will scoot into 0 degrees Taurus. And then the moon will follow into 0 degrees Taurus later in the early morning hours on April 20th. Okay. So why is that interesting to me? Well, we also have Pluto right now at 0 degrees Aquarius, right? So it's like the moon, the sun and the moon go into that 29 degree Aries point, and then their next stop is an exact square to Pluto. We could technically say this eclipse is already squaring Pluto, but if we really want to get that exact square, it doesn't actually happen until both the sun and the moon are in Taurus. And for me, the square to Pluto really comes back to empowerment. And going back to the martyr archetype that we were talking about at the beginning of the week, how are we rewriting that martyr archetype this week? And, potentially by Thursday, April 20th, we might be sort of re-empowering ourselves as the eclipse takes, whatever ending it is time to have. We're sort of re-empowering ourselves within this ending. And, the sun and the moon talking to a square to Pluto, it might even be this sort of like, I only am truly controlled by the things that I allow to control me. Like there's something there with, I don't need to be controlled by this mindset anymore, or I don't need to let this job or this boss or this friend or whatever have this much say in my life, or I don't necessarily need to give my power away to this situation. This is sort of like the reclamation moment, I think. And for that square to Pluto, right after the eclipse, we got temperance. Okay, so see, we're tempering, we're integrating this new kind of version of ourselves that's that's just kind of taking more charge of our own path. And one thing I do love about Aries is I think it reconnects us with our sense of free will. And in every single moment, although I do think fate and destiny very much do exist, in every single moment we can always make a choice. Like, even if we're making a choice to sit silently and breathe, it might not seem like that radical of a choice, but it's still a choice. Okay, so I do think this sense of like important choice is happening Thursday, Friday, and that kind of goes with Temperance. Now, what's funny is right after this eclipse, guys, we're not done yet, because right after this eclipse, what time will that be? Mercury stations retrograde, and that'll happen about 24 hours after the eclipse. Mercury will station retrograde at around, let's say, 4 a.m. Yeah, like at 3 a.m. on April 21st, okay? And that for me feels like, wow, something shifted with the eclipse. I've been like empowering myself in a new way, like the new narrative or the new perspective has arrived. Let's kind of check in with how I need to reestablish now how I'm doing things, which is a very Mercury retrograde thing. Like, how do I do the things now and make them in alignment with this new empowered version of myself? And we have the Eight of Cups, right? So Mercury retrograde, we're revisiting the past. We're sort of walking away from things to continually walking away from things that are supporting this new narrative that is brought in by the eclipse, okay? So it's a big week, my friends, and I hope these messages will marinate over time. I'm just going to really super quickly, as we end this video, I want to go into just like that 29-degree eclipse in Aries, where that's happening in your chart according to your rising sign, okay? So let's start with Libra. Libra, this eclipse is happening in the house of relationships, the 7th house of relationships for you. So we're looking at partnership transformation. We're looking at relationships that have expired. We're looking at new relationships being formed, new ways of creating meaningful relationships, potentially a lot of new people coming into your life in some way, maybe through a new opportunity that's coming through work, just because I'm looking at Mars in the 10th house squaring that kind of eclipse point in a way. So yeah, keep an eye on relationship themes, Libra. Scorpio rising, this eclipse is happening in your 6th house of work and everyday activities. So I think this eclipse is bringing up potentially the feeling of maybe feeling disempowered in the workplace, and how to empower yourself and increase your capacity to potentially learn or maybe work your way up in the workplace. Like maybe you're sick of being someone's employee and now you really want to be the boss. Like there's something like that going on. And at the same time, I think it has to do with educational kind of things maybe going on. Maybe you're taking this like tap class and it's really empowering you in some way to make bigger moves at work. There could be some Scorpio risings who are walking away from like a day job that's not necessarily serving them and maybe going back to school or learning something new. But really keep an eye on that 6th house when it comes to like your relationship with your boss, your coworkers, and really what's happening on the day-to-day. All right, Sag Rising, this eclipse is happening in the 5th house of romance, pleasure, joy, children. Potentially with Sag Risings, there could be some big changes that are happening when it comes to your kids' lives. But for those Sag Risings who don't have kids, we could be talking about stories that have to do with like sexuality and identity, and even you claiming your role as like an artist or creator or some kind of creative entrepreneur. So I think this eclipse might be opening the way for a more creative existence, which is really fun. Capricorn Rising, this eclipse is happening in the 4th house of the home, family, parents. I'm thinking that there could potentially be some changes going on with the home or the parents. Maybe you're moving, maybe you're thinking about going to a new city. The fourth house does sometimes have to do with death and mourning. So maybe someone in the family is maybe transitioning over to the other side, or maybe you are just grappling with some more kind of spiritual sense of like an ending and how to incorporate that into your own life. That's certainly not me predicting death in any way, but the fourth house does have its roots in sort of those endings and ancestral stories. So, also I would think about maybe what family patterns you're here to change in this lifetime as an individual, Okay, Aquarius rising. We've got that eclipse going through the third house. There could be some changes when it comes to siblings and your relationships with siblings. And at the same time, the third house is about writing. It's about media. It's about marketing. It's about, words and communication. So with the Aquarius rising people, I mean, it could just be a really important eclipse to reconnect with your own sense of like who you are and your own narratives, do some journaling on this eclipse. And also the third house has to do with the local community. So if any Aquarius risings here hold any roles in the local community, those things could be changing. Or maybe you're wanting to get more involved with like your neighborhood or making your neighborhood better in some way. That could be something that's coming up for Aquarius risings. Pisces rising. This eclipse is going through your second house of personal livelihood, finances. So for some Pisces risings, you might be making a big purchase around this time, an important purchase. I know a Pisces rising who's in the process of buying a house right now. That's one way I've seen this eclipse come through. On the other hand, there could be some reorientation when it comes to like how to structure your money and really how to structure your life in general. Just because I see Saturn in the first house too, and I'm like, all right, yeah, there's some new structure coming in. How does money kind of fall into place with that? And what makes you feel good when it comes to making money, and what avenues are you opening up, and also what avenues are kind of falling to the wayside when it comes to curating income and abundance into your life. Aries rising. Okay, this is going through the first house of identity of the self. So you've been going through a big transformation with how you're showing up in the world, and maybe reconnecting to your path in a more meaningful way. So I think a lot of Aries risings right now, they're sort of reconnecting with who they really are. Like it's on an existential level. Like, wow, like what is changing on my path? What subjects, what areas of focus do I want to bring in now that this old thing is eclipsed out of my life? There could also be some relationship and some home things going on for the Aries risings too. But overall, it feels very much like a go your own way, Fleetwood Mac kind of moment, right? Now for the Taurus risings, it's interesting because this eclipse is going through the 12th house, and that's the house of the subconscious, the sort of fear stories, our own self-defeating prophecies, but also the area of retreat and isolation. So I would say, especially for the Taurus risings, this week, if it's possible to kind of spend some extra time alone, get some extra rest, I think that could be really important, especially with that eclipse in the 12th house. Don't push yourself too hard when it comes to like work productivity. And that could actually be the Achilles heel of the eclipse. Like, I'm not being productive enough. I'm not doing enough. When in fact, the medicine of the moment would kind of be to be in that state of not doing, if that makes sense. Gemini rising, we've got that eclipse going through the 11th house of networks. So on the one hand, we could be releasing some, maybe drama that happened earlier this year when it comes to like groups and networks, and maybe friendships that kind of have sort of dissolved. And then right now we're kind of inviting in the new when it comes to connections that might really feel more aligned. And in a sense too, I think for Gemini risings with this eclipse in Aries in the 11th house, maybe the ultimate lesson was that you didn't need the collaborators, like you didn't need the support. You needed to be able to do it yourself. And that's not me necessarily like preaching like this toxic individuality or anything like that. But maybe there was a lesson here with really stepping into your power and being able to execute your dreams exactly in your own way. That's kind of what comes up as I see this transit. Cancer rising, we've got that eclipse going through the 10th house of career and public reputation. There might be big quit energy with the Cancer risings. Maybe there's a job that's just no longer in alignment. Maybe there's a way that you've been showing up in the physical world that hasn't felt in alignment in some way. And maybe now you're just starting to reconnect with how you actually want to show up in the world, maybe some new ideas, how you're planning to show up. I know for me, I'm a Cancer rising, and I'm thinking about different podcast ideas and different class ideas for this year. So I'm definitely thinking about how I'm going to be showing up in a little bit of a different way. And also Cancer risings may be thinking about like their own fear of authority within themselves, right? Like their fear of their own authority, their fear of their own ability to be the boss, to be the leader, to be the entrepreneur, things like that. So I think Cancer risings, like they're sort of stepping into their power in a very public way right now, or at least have karma around that. Leo risings, we've got this eclipse going through the 9th house. I was just hanging out with my Leo rising friend the other night, and like for Leo risings, we could be seeing themes when it comes to going back to school, feeling really empowered with a class you're taking or something that you're learning right now. But also there might be this sort of final separation of belief systems that were imposed on you during childhood, or any religious conditioning that feels like it's still maybe has you carrying some sense of shame or guilt. Like there's something here that feels just really freeing when it comes to the conditioning or the belief systems that are sort of reorienting in your life around this time. Okay. Virgo rising, we've got this eclipse going through the 8th house. Okay, so we have these themes of potentially the Virgo risings who are partnered. Partner might be going through some big changes. Maybe your partner's retiring, getting a new job, getting fired from their job. And maybe you're kind of planning with them around sort of that shared resource theme of the 8th house. And at the same time, the 8th house has to do with more than just our partner's money. It also has to do with maybe our own death and rebirth and our own way we are in relation with others. And there could be some themes of like attachments that come up, I think, with this eclipse. Like sort of the ability to voice certain needs, the ability to state what you want out of certain relationships, even though it brings up a fear of maybe rejection or abandonment. I'm just kind of thinking about how the 8th house kind of beckons us to connect with others in some way. So yeah, there's something like that coming up for you, Virgo rising, but I think it feels productive at the end of the day. Okay. So I think that's our last rising sign, and I'm glad that we did a little talk before this big week starts out. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know how this video resonates. I'm hoping that whatever gets eclipsed out of my 10th house will allow me to have more energy to make more YouTube content in the next year. So keep your fingers crossed for me. I'm sending you all good vibes. Thanks so much for making it to the end if you did. And I will see ya all next time.